The human mind holds infinite complexities and sometimes profound darkness. What shapes a monster? What drives their chilling compulsions? We seek the answers. This is Anatomy of a Predator. For 12 long years, this wild beast hunted the citizens of the Soviet Union. He moved like a ghost through a system that refused to believe he could even exist. The police were hunting a man, but they were fighting an empire. How did Andrei Chikatilo, a mild-mannered family man, become the most prolific serial killer in Soviet history? And how did a state with total control lose that control so completely? To find the answer, we must dissect not only the man, but the system that let him bleed it dry.
Our story begins on December 22nd, 1978, in the small Russian mining town of Shakhty. It was a place of grit and community, a town coated in a fine layer of coal dust, but one where everyone knew their neighbors and a sense of shared safety was assumed. In this town lived 9-year-old Lena Zakatnova. She was everything you'd hope for in a child, bright, happy, a good student who loved her family. Like many kids in her town, she was independent. She knew the routes around her home by heart, and she confidently walked them alone. On this day, her path crossed with a friendly-looking, unassuming man. He saw her independence not as a strength, but as an opportunity. This was Andrei Chikatilo. He approached her with a simple request, offering her a piece of imported chewing gum, a rare treat for a child in the Soviet Union, a small act of generosity masking an absolute evil. He lured her away from the path she knew so well towards a derelict house he had prepared. Inside that house, a private nightmare unfolded. After he murdered Lena, her belongings were found discarded in a nearby river: a child's red pioneer scarf, a waterlogged notebook, a school backpack. They were ghosts of a normal day, now evidence in a rising storm of panic. The authorities, under immense political pressure to project an image of control, needed a swift resolution. They found one in Alexander Kravchenko. Kravchenko was the perfect scapegoat. He had a prior conviction for a similar, though non-lethal crime, which made him an easy target for a police force desperate to close the case. He proclaimed his innocence. He even had a verifiable alibi. He was out of town when Lena was murdered. But in a system that valued closed cases over truth, his pleas were ignored. His alibi was systematically dismantled through coerced witnesses. Alexander Kravchenko was tried, convicted, and executed for a crime he did not commit. An innocent man was killed by the state to cover up the existence of a monster they couldn't comprehend. The case of Lena Zakatnova was officially closed. But for the real killer, a valuable lesson had been learned. The state itself was now complicit in his escape. He knew he could murder with impunity, and his reign of terror was only just beginning.
The killings resumed in 1981, and the pattern that emerged baffled police. Victims were found in Lesopolosa, the desolate forest strips that served as buffer zones alongside railway lines and highways. These liminal spaces, neither city nor wilderness, became the predator's hunting ground. A massive task force was formed, given the sterile code name Operation Lesopolosa. At its helm was Major Viktor Burakanov, a meticulous, almost obsessive detective from Rostov's Violent Crimes Division. He was a good man, tasked with an impossible job, catching a phantom while fighting a bureaucracy that often hindered his every move. For years, the hunt yielded nothing. But in 1984, the net finally seemed to catch something. They brought in a quiet teacher and Communist Party member named Andrei Chikatilo for questioning. They had what they believed was ironclad proof. At a crime scene, forensics had found type A blood and a type AB semen sample. To the investigators, the math was simple. The killer secreted type AB, so he had to be type AB. But when they tested Chikatilo's blood, it came back as type A. He didn't match. They had stumbled upon a biological anomaly known as being a secretor, a 1,000,000-to-1 quirk where a person's blood type can differ from the antigenic properties in their other bodily fluids. Soviet forensics was not advanced enough to understand this nuance. To them, it was a simple mismatch. It was a catastrophic failure of science that would cost dozens more lives. Andrei Chikatilo was released. With the investigation stalled, a brilliant psychiatrist, Dr. Alexander Bukhanovsky, was brought in. He created a pioneering psychological profile, describing a man tormented by sexual inadequacy, whose murders were a horrifying ritual of rage, power, and release. To the hardened detectives, it sounded like science fiction. They filed his report away, unaware that the key to their monster's mind was now sitting in a drawer, gathering dust.
To understand the man the police let go, we have to travel back to the origin of the rot. In 1936, Andrei Chikatilo was born into the shadow of the Holodomor, the great Ukrainian famine. His mother told him his older brother, Stepan, had been abducted and cannibalized by starving neighbors. Whether true or not, this story became his foundational myth. It taught him that humanity was a mask, survival was all that mattered, and people were merely meat. This external horror was matched by a deep internal shame. He was chronically impotent, a biological fact that made him feel like a broken, incomplete man in a society obsessed with machismo. This profound sexual failure became the engine of his rage. He built a perfect mask to hide it. On the surface, he was the ideal Soviet man, a husband, a father, a teacher. But the mask was cracking. He was quietly fired from his teaching job for assaulting young boys and girls. In another systemic failure, the authorities chose to simply shuffle their problem along, rather than confront it, allowing the predator to escalate. His inability to perform sexually fueled his violence. The knife became the phallus. The act of stabbing and mutilation became the release he could never achieve otherwise. This is the core of his signature. This was the man who walked out of the police station in 1984, a man perfectly split in two. And the system, by looking at a drop of his blood instead of into the abyss of his mind, had just told him he was invisible. Feeling untouchable, Chikatilo unleashed a final horrifying frenzy. His rage grew more uncontrolled, his methods more savage. The mutilations became more extreme, the acts more performative. He was no longer just killing, he was annihilating his victims, as if trying to erase them from existence. The list of names grew into a horrifying chorus of the lost. Lyubov Beryak, Dmitry Ptashnikov, Tatiana Rizova, Yelena Bakulina, Dmitry Illarionov, Ivan Fomin, Viktor Tishchenko, Alexander Diakonov, Helena Varga, Viktor Petrov, Yevgeny Muratov, Alexei Voronko, Alexander Chepel, Valentina Chuchulina. Each a life, a family, a future, all extinguished by the same shadow. For 6 more years, he evaded the largest manhunt in Soviet history. But in the end, his downfall came not from high-tech forensics, but from simple, diligent police work. On November 20th, 1990, a police sergeant at a train station noticed a man emerging from a wooded area, his shoes muddy, trying to wash his hands and face. It was Chikatilo. The sergeant, just doing his rounds, stopped him, checked his papers, and though he let him go, he logged the interaction. When another body was found in that same wooded area, Burakov's team checked the logbook. They had their name. This time, there would be no mistake. They arrested him. But in the interrogation room, Chikatilo was a stone wall. Desperate, Major Burakov played his final card. He called Dr. Bukunovsky.
Dr. Bukunovsky entered the room not as a cop, but as a biographer. He didn't accuse, he described. For hours he read his psychological profile aloud, detailing Chikatilo's inner world. The shame, the impotence, the rage, back to him with stunning accuracy. For the first time in his life, Andrei Chikatilo felt understood. The stone wall crumbled. He began to weep. And then he began to talk. For the next 9 days, he confessed to 56 murders. His trial was a spectacle of madness and grief as he screamed from his cage at the families of those he destroyed. On February 14th, 1994, Andrei Chikatilo was executed by a single gunshot to the back of the head. So, what is the anatomy of this predator? He was a man fractured by historical trauma, biological cruelty, and crushing personal shame. But a broken man is not always a monster. Chikatilo's pathology was amplified and given room to grow by a rigid system that executed an innocent man to preserve an illusion, an ideology that declared monsters couldn't exist in a worker's paradise, giving one a perfect shadow to hide in for over a decade. In the end, the story of Andrei Chikatilo is a terrifying symbiosis. It is the story of a mad beast, yes, but it is also the story of the cage that was left open for him to roam.
Thank you for joining us for this deeply disturbing journey into the darkness. It is easy to get lost in the psychology of the predator, but we must never, ever forget the human cost. The names and faces you saw represent real people, whose lives were stolen with unimaginable cruelty. Our purpose here is to honor their memory by refusing to let their stories be forgotten. If this investigation was meaningful to you, please consider liking and subscribing to our new channel. And if there is another predator whose mind you believe we need to dissect, let us know in the comments below. Monsters aren't born in the darkness. They are made in the quiet shadows of our world. By dragging their anatomy into the light, peeling back every layer of shame and deceit, we learn their patterns, we honor their victims, and we take away the shadows where the next one might be hiding. Until our next investigation, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay out of the shadows.